Think of the American West. Close your eyes and picture the ultimate symbol of the Native American frontier. You are almost certainly picturing a Sioux warrior. He is riding bareback on a Mustang, eagle feathers in his hair, galloping across the endless Great Plains to hunt buffalo. This is the image Hollywood sold to the world. It is the image written in our history books. The Sioux, the fierce nomads of the plains, the brilliant tacticians who wiped out General George Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn. But what if I told you that this legendary image is a historical illusion? What if I told you that the people who defined the Great Plains didn't actually come from there? And what if a tiny strand of hair locked away in a museum recently revealed a genetic anomaly so baffling? It is forcing scientists to rewrite the entire history of human migration. Today, we are going to look at the true story of the Sioux. And fair warning, everything you think you know is about to change. To understand the magnitude of this historical plot twist, we have to travel back in time, but not to the open grasslands. We have to go to the dense, dark forests of the American Midwest, near the Great Lakes and the Ohio River Valley. According to the ancient oral traditions of the Sioux elders, their ancestors did not chase buffalo on horses. They were a woodland people. For a long time, modern historians dismissed these stories as myths, but recent archaeological digs and linguistic mapping have proven the elders were telling the absolute truth. Around 1,500 years ago, the ancestors of the Sioux were semi-sedentary farmers. They didn't live in the iconic teepees. They lived in earth lodges and bark houses. They navigated the Mississippi and Ohio rivers in handcrafted canoes. They cultivated maize, beans, and squash. So, how did a peaceful society of river navigators and forest farmers transform into the most feared light cavalry in North American history? The answer is a brutal domino effect caused by global colonialism. In the 1600s and 1700s, European colonists began flooding the eastern shores of America. French fur traders pushed into the Great Lakes region, and they brought something that would disrupt the balance of power forever: muskets. The French allied with the Ojibwe tribe, arming them with these modern weapons. The Ojibwe used their newfound firepower to aggressively expand their territory westward. Outgunned and outmatched, the Sioux were violently pushed out of their ancestral forest homes in Minnesota and Wisconsin. They were driven out into the unforgiving, treeless expanse of the Great Plains. They were refugees, forced to adapt to a harsh new world or face extinction. But out on those plains, they encountered a creature that would alter their DNA and their destiny: the horse. Brought to the Americas by Spanish conquistadors, wild horses had multiplied and migrated north. When the displaced Sioux captured their first horses in the early 1700s, a cultural revolution happened overnight. Within just 2 or 3 generations, they completely discarded their farming roots. They mastered equestrian skills with a terrifying brilliance. They became the undisputed lords of the plains. The legendary horse culture that fought at Little Bighorn in 1876 had only existed for about 100 years. It was not ancient. It was a rapid, desperate, and genius adaptation for survival. But this historical revelation is only the first layer of the mystery. The deeper, much darker secret of the Sioux wasn't found in the dirt. It was found in their blood. In recent years, population geneticists began studying the DNA of indigenous American tribes. They use mitochondrial DNA, genes passed strictly from mother to daughter, to trace human lineages back tens of thousands of years. Think of it as a genetic breadcrumb trail left behind by our ancient ancestors. Native Americans generally fall into 4 major mitochondrial haplogroups: A, B, C, and D. These groups are easy to explain. They all trace straight back to East Asia and Siberia. They perfectly fit the accepted scientific timeline that 15,000 years ago, Asian hunters crossed the Bering Land Bridge into North America. But when scientists tested the Sioux, they found a genetic ghost. Roughly 15% of the Sioux population carries a fifth, highly unusual genetic signature known as haplogroup X in the scientific community. This discovery caused absolute chaos. They call it the X problem. Why? Because haplogroup X does not exist in Siberia. It does not exist among the East Asian populations that allegedly populated the Americas. Instead, when scientists trace the origins of haplogroup X, the trail leads to the Middle East, the Caucasus Mountains, and parts of southern Europe. How did a genetic signature from the ancient Middle East end up in the bloodstream of a Native American tribe in South Dakota, thousands of years before Columbus or the Vikings ever set sail? Desperate for answers, scientists proposed the Solutrean hypothesis in the late 1990s. This theory suggested that during the Ice Age, ancient Europeans built boats and navigated the icy edges of the Atlantic Ocean, eventually landing in America and mixing with the locals. It was a fascinating idea, heavily debated in universities worldwide. But modern DNA sequencing crushed this theory. When scientists mapped the genomes of the oldest skeletons found in the Americas, like the 8,000-year-old Kennewick man, they found zero traces of recent European or Middle Eastern admixture. Kennewick man was purely Native American. The answer to the X problem didn't come from Europe. It came from a frozen grave in the heart of Siberia. In 2014, scientists analyzed the remains of a 24,000-year-old boy found at an archaeological site called Malta. When they sequenced this ancient boy's genome, they couldn't believe their eyes. Up to 38% of his DNA came from ancient Western Eurasians, the ancestors of modern Europeans and Middle Easterners. This boy lived in Siberia, yet he carried the genetic ghost of the West. And here is the earth-shattering connection. That exact same Western Eurasian genetic signal is found in the DNA of almost all Native Americans today, including the Sioux. This means that the Sioux did not encounter Europeans or Middle Easterners in America. They didn't cross the Atlantic. The truth is far older. The founding population that crossed the Bering Land Bridge into America 20,000 years ago was not purely East Asian. They were already a mixed race. Tens of thousands of years ago, wandering tribes from ancient Europe and the Middle East walked deep into Siberia, met with East Asian populations, and merged together. The Sioux carry the blood of Ice Age survivors who were already a blend of East and West long before the Americas were ever discovered. There is no such thing as a pure, isolated race. We have always been a species of explorers, wandering and mixing under the ancient stars. And this brings us to the final, most emotional chapter of the Sioux story. In 2021, an unprecedented scientific breakthrough took place at the University of Cambridge. A team led by geneticist Esk Willerslev did the impossible. They managed to extract viable autosomal DNA from a single lock of hair. This hair had been kept in a museum for over a century. It belonged to the legendary Sioux chief, Sitting Bull. The scientists compared Sitting Bull's DNA to a living man named Ernie LaPointe. For years, LaPointe had claimed to be the great-grandson of the famous chief, but skeptics and historians doubted him. The laboratory results silenced the skeptics forever. The DNA was a perfect match. The genetic continuity was undeniable. But this experiment was about so much more than proving a family tree. It was a profound statement about the limits of human erasure. Think about the sheer violence the Sioux people have endured. They were pushed out of their ancestral forests by guns. They were hunted across the plains by the U.S. cavalry. They were forced onto reservations. Their children were stripped from their families and placed into boarding schools, physically punished for speaking their native language. The goal of the 19th and 20th century policies was simple: total assimilation and cultural erasure. But the oppressors forgot one crucial thing. They could burn the tippies, They could ban the ceremonies and they could rewrite the history books, but they could not touch the DNA. The DNA survived. It traveled invisibly through the blood of survivors. It carried the memories of the Ohio River valleys. It carried the echoes of the great buffalo hunts, and it carried the ancient phantom signatures of the Middle East, preserving a 20,000-year-old journey across the ice. The story of the Sioux is a mirror held up to all of humanity. It teaches us that the neat, perfectly drawn borders of history are always an illusion. We are not simple, stationary creatures. The Sioux were forest dwellers. They were equestrian masters. They are the descendants of a vastly complex global migration. Every layer of their history is real. None of it cancels the other out. They are a living testament to human resilience, and their bloodline proves that no matter how hard empires try to erase the past, the truth will always survive in our cells, waiting to be rediscovered. If this journey into the genetic secrets of the Sioux changed how you see history, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. What other historical mysteries do you think DNA will solve next? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next episode.